I knew this would be weird. Happy Easter, by the way. And looking forward to this day, I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to engage with this. And I wasn't sure I was going to feel like really celebrating, because I miss you. I miss the family being together. But I believe it's more important than ever. Even though we may not feel like celebrating, it's more important than ever that we do. It's more important than ever because in times like these, this is the hope that sustains us. And so it's worth celebrating. It's totally worth celebrating today. It's totally worth looking past the difficulties and the uncertainties and the unprecedented times that we live in and remembering this. So we want to celebrate today. And as you can see, I am dressed up like a Fabergé egg today. And I'd like to know that I didn't get dressed up for nothing. So I appreciate that. We've gotten some photos in, #RiverbendATX. And you can send us pictures of you if you took the time to get dressed up, if this is one of your traditions. That's a good thing. It's been a tradition of mine virtually my entire life since I was a child that Easter was a special day. You polished your shoes, you got a new Easter outfit. Easter traditions are a very important part of Easter, and they get weird sometimes. They just do. There are traditions that go on right now on Easter Sunday, on the Easter weekend, around the world that are, let's just face it, they're just kind of strange. In Scandinavian countries and in South American and Central American countries and Asia and in Africa and Europe and Eastern Europe, there are traditions. For example, in Greece, in Corfu, Greece, they have a tradition after the Sunday Mass on Easter Sunday is over, after the liturgy is finished and the church bells start ringing, they throw pots, clay pots, out of their windows into the crowds on the street below. And the people on the street below cheer and applaud for these flying pots. I don't know how they avoid the shrapnel, but it's not like they throw out these little tiny flower pots. They actually throw out huge, like lazy boy size pots, because nothing says I am spiritual like smashing a gigantic pot on Easter Sunday morning and endangering your friends from the shrapnel that ensues. That really says he is risen, doesn't it? But that's not as strange as some of the traditions they have in Italy. They have some amazing traditions in Florence and some of the other cities. My favorite is what is called La Madonna che Scappa. It takes place in Sulmona, Abruzzo, Italy. On Easter Sunday morning, teams of 8 young men dress up in priestly vestments, and they carry statues of the saints, especially the greatest honor is to carry the statue of the Madonna. And they don't just carry it, they run with it. And they run with it from the center of Solama and Garibaldi Square, the arches in Piazza Garibaldi. They run to the village down the road to the church San Filippo Neri. And this thing that they carry actually weighs about 400 or 500 pounds. It's this large statues that they carry, and they run, and it's 3.5 miles. That just sounds terribly exhausting on Easter Sunday morning. When you want to relax, you have a race of 3.5 miles carrying a 400 or 500 pound statue of the Madonna. And it's meant to remind people that on Easter Sunday morning, Mary found the tomb empty and she ran to tell the disciples. So there's an object lesson. Now, one of the stranger traditions is an Eastern European tradition, a Polish tradition called Jagniczy no Maslana. Jagniczy no Maslana. And what Jagniczy no Maslana is it's a 30 or 40 pound carved slab of butter that is carved into the shape of a Passover lamb. Because as anybody knows, nothing says he is risen quite like 30 or 40 pounds of butter carved into the shape of a lamb and placed on your Easter Sunday table. Now, these are traditions, and it's all good. It's all good. I mean, if there's any day in the year, any day in our life that is totally worth celebrating, going off the rails with our enthusiasm and our celebration, it's this day. Because this is the day that changed everything. This is the day when what was birthed on our planet was a different kind of hope. This was the day that gave birth to the transformation of human existence. This is the day that we celebrate the resurrection of Christ from the dead. And it's this day that gives us life. And it's this day that gives birth to those of us who identify ourselves as the people of the resurrection. Today I want to take a few moments to talk about what that means to be a people of the resurrection. What does that mean, and how do we do it? And my prayer today is that in the midst of our celebrations, no matter how unusual they may be, or no matter how different they may be because of our circumstances, that we would remember that it was on this day that we are called to be different, that we are called to be radical, we are called to be revolutionaries, we are called to be the people of the resurrection. And today I want us to think about, what does that really mean? It was 4 weeks ago that we began a conversation. It was 4 weeks ago that we began our quarantine. This is our 4th Sunday when I'm here by myself in this empty room, talking to you in your living rooms or your bedrooms or wherever this moment finds you. And those 4 weeks we dedicated to a conversation about the resurrection before the resurrection by Christ before the resurrection of Christ. The resurrection of a man named Lazarus of Bethany. It was kind of the beta test of the resurrection. It was the proof of concept. It was the resurrection before the resurrection. And for the last 4 weeks, we've considered the lessons of the resurrection. And it's only recorded in one chapter in the entire Bible, in the 11th chapter of the book of John. John is the only one who records it for us. It tells us that Jesus waited until Lazarus was dead for 4 days, and then he made his way to the village of Bethany. When he got there, he had them take him to the tomb where Lazarus had been laid 4 days earlier. He had them roll aside the stone, and then he commanded, and he called him by name, "Lazarus, come out." And when he came out, he told the people that were gathered there to remove the grave clothes, to remove those bandages that had been placed on him as he had been embalmed, and set him free. It's in this moment that we get a glimpse of not what happened to Lazarus, but what happens to us. Because his resurrection is our resurrection, and his life is our life, and his path is our path. And what Jesus says to him, he says to us, remove your bondages. Remove those things that hinder you, and be set free. As people of the resurrection, we are called to live liberated lives. But what does that mean? What does it really mean? How do we do it? How do we live as people of the resurrection? Well, the first thing I think people of the resurrection understand, they first understand that they are familiar with death. People of the resurrection are familiar with death. And I know what you're thinking, Dave, that's really dark. I thought we were celebrating here, and you go right to familiarity with death. But people of the resurrection understand, because you cannot fully appreciate the resurrection and the power of the resurrection if you don't fully appreciate the power of death. Because death is the most powerful force in the universe. There's only one thing that is more powerful than death, because everything in the universe, from radioactive isotopes to solar systems and galaxies, even the universe itself is subject to the laws of death. Death rules over everything. Death is, except for one thing, the most powerful force in the universe. And that one thing is what we celebrate today. I think in our day, like right now, where we are at as a culture, perhaps as a human race, is we are being reminded in painful ways of the power of death. We are being reminded that we have to live carefully and thoughtfully. We have to live mindful of the power of death. But the people of the resurrection are called not to be afraid of death. Not to be afraid of death. But there's a difference between fearing death and fearing dying. A fear of dying makes us wise. A fear of dying makes us careful. A fear of dying makes us thoughtful. And in this season, we are reminded to be good stewards of this life, because the people of the resurrection are mindful not only that I am not afraid of death, but that I am vulnerable, and I am fragile, and I am frail, and every breath that I have in this life, every moment, every day, every opportunity that I have to be a light in a dark world, that is something I want to be a steward of. So the people of the resurrection can have a healthy fear of dying, but no fear of death. People of the resurrection are people who are familiar with the power of death, because the one thing that is greater than that power is the thing that raises us to new life. People of the resurrection are familiar with death. I think people of the resurrection are also people who are generous in hope. They're generous in hope. Now hope, you may think you understand what hope is, but hope is an abstract concept. Hope is a Salvador Dali painting. Hope is a Jackson Pollock. Hope is difficult to define. It's difficult to put words on exactly what hope is. I struggle to say this is exactly what it means to have hope. And I, of all people, should know. You see, 24 years ago, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Pauline psychology and theology of hope. My doctoral dissertation. I got a copy of it right here. 562 pages. 7 years of my life. I studied the psychology and the philosophy and the theology of hope from one chapter in the Bible. From the 8th chapter of the book of Romans, I built a theology and a philosophy and a psychology of hope from Paul's writings. 7 years, 562 pages of 40-page bibliography. Time I can never get back. And all I got to show for it was this. And you know what I know about hope? Not a lot. What I know about hope is that hope is a shapeshifter. Hope looks different at different times in different people. Hope is able to morph and to change to be that thing that we need exactly when we need it. If we can find it, there is hope there in the most unusual places. And hope is subatomic. Hope is invisible, because the power of hope is just a glimmer of it. Just a thread of it, just a touch of it, just a subatomic particle of hope. And I have seen it, where it can sustain a person, where it can hold on to the smallest fraction or particle of hope. I have seen that sustain people in the most difficult and dark and dangerous of times. As long as they have hope, they will not give up, and they will press on. I think we know what hope is because it's so clear when it's gone. When someone has lost all hope, when they have given up all hope, when they are hopeless, that is a desperate, dark, dangerous place. Because when you are hopeless, then nothing has meaning. Nothing has significance. The total loss of hope is one of the most desperate and dangerous things that a person can experience. And so we understand hope because we know what it's like when it's not there. We know what it feels like to have no hope. But you know how I really understand what hope is? It's not my dissertation. It's not the philosophical and theological and psychological study that revealed to me what hope is. I know what hope is when I see it shared. Because that's the power of hope. The power of hope is that I can give hope. I can be hope. And I see that hope. I see that hope in a family that purchases boxes of PPEs for first responders. And I see hope in those boxes. I see hope in the bags of food that are given away to hundreds and hundreds of people every day. People who have no hope of a full meal, perhaps for that entire week. And that hope looks like a person who takes the time to bag that up and give it to them and place it in their car. That's what hope looks like, because hope can be shared. In fact, hope is meant to be shared. And people of the resurrection are supposed to be lousy with hope. We're supposed to be the most generous people. And that's what this day is a celebration of. This day is a celebration of that shared hope, the power of that hope. People of the resurrection, what do I think they look like? What does it mean? They're people who are familiar with death. They understand the power of it. They don't fear death, but they respect the power of death. There are people who are generous in their hope. And I think people of the resurrection are overwhelmed by grace. They're overwhelmed by grace. And ask yourself for a second, or I'll ask it for you. What was Lazarus doing when Jesus raised him from the dead? What was Lazarus doing in the moment that Jesus said, Lazarus, come out? You know what Lazarus was doing? He was being dead. That was all Lazarus did. You know what Lazarus did to deserve getting raised from the dead? He died. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, well, that's no big deal. Dave, I just heard you a minute ago say death is a big deal. It's a powerful thing. I know that's what I said. But all he was doing was being dead. That was it. Now you might think, well, he was a friend of Jesus, right? He was, and I've heard messages preached on how, you know, if you want to be raised from the dead, you have to be a friend of Jesus. And that's not bad theology. But because I'm a friend of Jesus, that doesn't mean I deserve resurrection. That doesn't mean I'm worthy of it. That doesn't mean that I've earned it. No, it is a gift. It is a total gift. It was all about him raising Lazarus from the dead. It's all about him giving us hope where there is none. It's about him raising us up. And we understand that. As people of the resurrection, we understand that it is all by grace. It is not because of something that we have done or something that we have earned or something that we deserve. What it really is about is that we understand the beauty and the elegance of second chances. We know what grace looks like because we've been allowed to begin again. We know what it is like to rise up from the ashes. We understand what it means to be forgiven. And what that means is we are overwhelmed by grace. And if you know what it is, you show what it is. I think these are the attributes of what it means to be a people of the resurrection. That we have a healthy respect for death. We're familiar with it. We understand the brutality and the cruelty of it. And we are people who are generous with hope. We are generous in our hope because we know that hope is most clearly seen when it's shared, when it's given. And we are people who are overwhelmed by grace. Because that is the gift that we have been given. The gift of life beyond life. The gift of a second chance. of a new beginning, of a fresh start. I believe this is what it means for us to be the people of the resurrection. And in times like this, in days like this is hard for us to understand. And it had to be hard for Lazarus to understand. You see, the story of Lazarus is interesting, because this is the only time he's mentioned. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't even mention Lazarus' name. Lazarus doesn't come up in the book of Acts. In none of the epistles, he's never mentioned. And that really doesn't make much sense to us, because he should have been the headliner. He should have been the guy that stood up in the book of Acts and said, hey, I was dead, and I came back to life. And that's the guy I'm talking about, the guy that did that. The one who raised me from the dead was himself raised from the dead. I mean, he should have been the superstar of the early church. But the only time we see him is in John 11 and in the first few verses of John chapter 12. It tells us that a few days after Lazarus was raised from the dead, there was a dinner party given in Jesus' honor. It was in Bethany, where Lazarus was from. And it says that when people found out that Jesus was going to be there, great crowds of people came to Bethany, but they didn't just come to see Jesus, they came to see Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. And the religious and the political leaders found out about this, and they were concerned. And they were concerned that people were coming, and they were believing in Jesus because Lazarus was there. And so the same crowd of people who had decided earlier to lynch and kill Jesus decided we have to kill Lazarus too, because many of the Jews were going over and believing in him. They were right, you know. They were absolutely right. He was a dangerous man. After that, we don't know what happened to Lazarus. He disappears. Inexplicably, he evaporates from the story of the birth of the church. Now, there's really no evidence, but I have a theory. And I have no biblical foundation to build this on, no historical data to say this. It's just kind of a hunch that they make good on their plans. That Lazarus didn't live long enough to see Jesus raised from the dead. That possibly on the same day when Jesus was crucified, Lazarus was assassinated. Because they knew, you see. They knew. They knew exactly the power of a resurrected life. They knew that if a person truly lived a resurrected life, it was a game changer. It was going to change the status quo. It was going to upset the paradigm. It was going to turn everything in their world upside down. They knew that, and they knew they couldn't let it happen. But what they didn't know was that there would be millions and millions of men and women and children from every tribe and every tongue, from every nation and every continent, from every age down through the centuries. There will be those who follow in the footsteps of the risen Savior and follow in the footsteps of Lazarus, and they live resurrected lives. And that changes everything. That changes the world. And it is what we are called to be. It is what we celebrate today. What we celebrate today is that sacred calling to be people of the resurrection. So that wherever we are and whatever we're doing, we can live differently. And that is worth celebrating. Even when we kind of celebrate in strange ways. And we celebrate in unusual ways, and we do. I mean, around the world, there are some really wacky, I mean, seriously strange celebrations of the resurrection. I mean, they fly kites in the Caribbean, and they actually nail people to crosses in the Philippines. They read murder mysteries in Scandinavia. But one of the most unusual takes place in Czechoslovakia, where on Easter they make what's called a pomlázka. A pomlázka is basically a switch, a whip. And it's made out of a willow branch, out of willow branches, and it's tied together with colorful ribbons. And the tradition for hundreds of years in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia and Slovakia and Western Russia, is that on Easter, men would take these pomlázkas and they would hit women with it. They would hit women they find attractive. This was their Easter tradition. He is risen. Let me hit you with a switch because I find you attractive. And they believed that not only were you flattering the woman by saying you found her attractive, you were blessing her with beauty and health and fertility in the coming year. And the women, in response to being hit with the pomlázka, being hit with the switch, would give the men colored eggs. And if they didn't have colored eggs, they gave them cash gifts. And if they didn't have cash gifts, don't shoot the messenger, okay? I didn't make this up. This is not my tradition. This goes back centuries in Eastern Europe. If the women didn't have eggs and they didn't have cash, they gave them shots of whiskey, which is always a good encouragement for a man with a stick in his hand. Nothing says he is risen like the pomlázka. Now, in more modern times, we've developed some sensibilities about that tradition, and so women are allowed to retaliate appropriately by pouring buckets of ice water on the men who hit them with the switch. In fact, today, in some Eastern European countries, Easter Sunday simply turns into a gigantic water fight. Now, that's a tradition that seems a little more appropriate than the pomlázka. I know it's weird, but before you get all judgy, just hold on a second. Did the Easter Bunny show up at your house today? That's right, the Easter Bunny. The egg-laying rabbit who pops out colored eggs and then puts them in a decorated basket and then hides them so that your children can find it. Nothing says he is risen like an anomaly of nature, an egg-laying bunny who lays colorful eggs and then hides them. We have Easter traditions, and we should. It's all good. I mean, I've been getting dressed up on Easter Sunday morning my entire life. And it's a great opportunity to kind of pay my respect. That picture, hopefully, that you're seeing right now, this was probably before I was 3 years old, and I'm killing it right there. I am murdering it. The only sad thing, and that's my grandfather there, and we, you know, obviously kind of were digging the dressed up for Easter Sunday, but I have to say, it's kind of depressing when you actually peak at about 2.5 years old, and it's kind of downhill from there. But every Easter, when I became a father, and if you're a father of 3 daughters, every Easter becomes an adventure in getting your children new outfits. And every year we had to get, my wife and my daughters got new outfits. We had to basically put in our budget money for new Easter dresses and new Easter clothes. And I know they're totally beautiful and adorable. And every year they get a new outfit, and we pose for pictures, and they would dress up. And this was our Easter tradition. And they would get Easter baskets with chocolate Easter bunnies and Easter eggs. And then we go take pictures of them standing in the wildflowers and the bluebonnets. And this was our Easter tradition. And I'm glad that some of you have actually sent in pictures so that I'm not the only one who's dressed up like a Fabergé egg. I really thank you for all the folks who sent in pictures. The first folks who sent in pictures, Andy and Bev Rayford sent us a picture. Thanks for sending in that picture of your Easter finest. And Gail Gibson put on her Easter hat. I love that Easter hat. Gail, thanks for that. And Joy Scott. Joy Scott is actually killing it right there. That is an amazing Easter outfit. Thanks for sharing that. And Linda Perkins, thank you for showing us the bluebonnets, the obligatory bluebonnet picture. And Matt and Anna Welch, thank you for sending in how dressed up you got for Easter Sunday morning. And Terry Witt, thanks for showing us a picture of how relaxed you are on Easter Sunday morning, because that's what I call your Easter finest. You see, this is a day worth celebrating. It's all good. It's all good. Because this is a day that changed everything. This is a day that upset the status quo and turned the world upside down. This is the day that gave birth to a new hope. This is the day that gave birth to generations of men and women and children who would follow in the footsteps of the Savior and follow in the footsteps of the risen Lazarus and live as people of the resurrection. And while we may not feel like celebrating today, this is exactly what we need to do. This is exactly where we need to be. We need to be claiming our calling as people of the resurrection and celebrating that today. Happy Easter.